former colleague, well, he's still a colleague of mine. He worked for me as a graduate student when he was doing his master's, when we did the Battle of Chelsea Creek. He did the history, and no one has found any additional information despite looking since his marvelous work. Craig has done extensive work in Maine, New Hampshire, and now Massachusetts, and now across Europe, I guess, Craig. I know
yeah,
Scotland,
you could say
Spain.
that. Scotland, Spain, England, heading over into France a little bit.
But before we start your talk, let me just make a quick announcement. I have to look at my calendar for dates. The next meeting will be May 17th. I traded emails with Ryan Wheeler, and it looks like we'll be able to do an in-person meeting for May. We'll probably do this as a hybrid because I know some people still don't want to go out. The speaker will be Dr. Claudia Chang from Sweetbriar College in Virginia. She's recently retired, but she's done an extensive amount of work in Uzbekistan and that region of Southwest Asia. I don't have a specific topic from her yet, but she'd like to come and actually do the talk in person. For her, it's a threefer: meet with us, see her daughter, and visit her elderly mother. So it's kind of nice to be able to do a tie-in. Claudia was a co-graduate student with me at Binghamton. And with that, coming back to Craig's talk tonight, I've been badgering Craig for a long time, and it's unfortunate that he's still in Edinburgh. Well, it's fortunate for him, but unfortunate for us. The time difference always makes it a little bit difficult, but he's worked on so many different sites, and he's become such an expert in battlefield archaeology that I thought this really would be a nice change for us to get something that's not quite North America, and because typically that's what we have had often, as well as something in the battlefield range where you really can find out conflict archaeology is very pertinent for today. And so with that, I'd really like to hope that this will be a kickoff of several more talks over the next year on battlefield studies. Not necessarily from you, Craig. I won't pressure you too much.
Oh, good. Thank you, because
you're up very late, I know. So,
you can't do that to me tonight, Vic.
But with that, why don't I turn it over to Craig to give his talk. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
Well, thank you, Vic. I apologize for it being so dark. As Vic has said, it's well after midnight here now, and the light would be coming in from the window, but since it's pitch black out, it is what it is. Well, thank you for having me along tonight. This presentation involves a new application of the KOCOA terrain analysis methodology that shows promise as an interpretational tool when examining undocumented sites of conflict, or those sites that lack primary historical documentation. We will be examining the Roman conquest of the Cantabrian oppidum Monte Bernorio that occurred during the Cantabrian Wars. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this period in history, the Cantabrian Wars, or the Bellum Cantabricum et Astricum, and you'll have to pardon my Latin, were a series of Roman military operations that took place in the modern autonomous provinces of Cantabria, Asturias, Leon, and Palencia in Spain between 29 BC and 19 BC. While these operations had the practical effect of subjugating the last free peoples of the Iberian Peninsula, the true cause of the conflict is obscure. Classical sources, mainly Florus, Orosius, and Dio Cassius, say that the Cantabrians brought the conflict upon themselves through frequent raids on their peaceful neighbors who are already allied to Rome. Modern historians like Churchin and Vargas suggest that the mineral wealth of the region was what Rome coveted. However, the imperial politics of Rome must also be considered. Augustus had recently been named emperor after the conclusion of a costly civil war with Mark Antony, and may have been needed to consolidate his power. He had gained control of the army, he had gained control of the province of Hispanio's Interior, but he was only able to control the army due to the presence of a barbarian people or peoples who had not yet submitted to the rule of Rome on the borders. These happened to be the Cantabrians and the Asturians. Preliminary operations began in 29 BC, but our focus is on the campaign of 26 BC, and on this graphic, that is represented by the green arrows. The campaign of 26 BC was the largest, and it was led by Augustus himself, ensuring that it was chronicled by classical authors. Livy is believed to have dealt with the campaign in detail, but unfortunately his books that contained the relevant passages are lost. All that remains are short treatments. Florus, Orosius, and Dio Cassius are the best, but these are problematic in terms of the place names and the locations of the battles they described. Now, the Roman army is estimated to have numbered approximately 50,000 men, comprised of 8 legions and auxiliaries. They marched from Segasama, which is present-day Sassamon, in 3 columns with the intent of approaching the Cantabrian homeland on 3 fronts. A Roman fleet was also dispatched from Gaul to harry the northern coast, opening a 4th front. Augustus is believed to have commanded the center column personally. This column is thought to have operated within the Pisuerga River Valley. Brigida is named as the first great victory of the campaign. There is a possibility that Brigida is Monte Bernorio, but this is just a hypothesis. Cantabrian survivors gathered at Mons Vindius for a final stand of sorts, and the capture of Mons Vindius by the Romans marked the end of Augustus's direct involvement in the Cantabrian Wars. The following year of 25 BC, the Asturians were likewise defeated. Rebellions flared from time to time. The last of the fighting took place in 19 BC. On this map, Brigida is actually marked as Bellica, which is a corruption of another name for Brigida. Monte Bernorio is one of the largest and most significant Iron Age sites in Spain. The mountain itself is limestone, oval-shaped and approximately 1,173 meters in elevation above mean sea level. The oppidum occupies the relatively flat summit and upper terraces of Monte Bernorio. The summit, or acropolis, is encircled by a wall and field rampart, reinforced on the western side by a V-shaped ditch. The rampart encloses a 28-hectare area. The terraces of the mountain are enclosed within an impressive discontinuous multivallate system of earthworks that raises the total area enclosed to approximately 90 hectares. You can get an idea of how big this site is by the map here on the left. The outer earthworks extend all the way down the mountain. The acropolis is this kidney-shaped plateau here at the summit, and the rampart circles the entire summit with gates here, here, and here. And this large structure is a Roman fort that was erected following the battle. Monte Bernorio occupies a strategic position overlooking natural transportation routes. Now, presumably the Romans were also using these transportation routes during their invasion. The north-south route through the Pisuerga River Valley was the main route connecting the Meseta with the Cantabrian Sea. Roland Sim analyzed this route in his 1970 work on the Cantabrian Wars. The east-west route connected the provinces of Asturias and Galicia with the Pyrenees and Mediterranean through the Ebro River Valley. And this location was deemed so important that once the Romans have taken the oppidum, they built their own fortifications on top of the mountain. Now, this project represents a different application of the methodology than what is commonly used in the United States, or from what we used at the Battle of Chelsea Creek more than a decade ago now. In the US, KOCOA is generally used pre-excavation as a locational aid, using a methodology that the American Battlefield Protection Program adapted to historical battles when they borrowed KOCOA from the US Army. In this case, defining terrain features are derived from the historical record. At Monte Bernorio, however, KOCOA is used post-excavation as an interpretational tool. In this application, the methodology used is the same as that used by the US Army, where the defining terrain features are derived from the terrain itself. And once you have generated a list of defining features, the features are categorized according to this chart. It's important to note that not all defining features end up being KOCOA features. We'll briefly run down through them. Key terrain is any landscape feature that conveys an advantage to the force in possession of it. Observation in fields of fire. Observation is line of sight, what can be seen by the observer, either aided or unaided. Fields of fire is the area that can be covered by a weapon system. Obstacles are terrain features that obstruct, block, and divert movement, and they come in two varieties, natural or existing, and man-made or reinforcing. Avenues of approach and withdrawal are the routes or pathways to the target objective. They're classified as unrestricted, restricted, or severely restricted based on obstacles. You reckon the avenue of approach backwards from the objective point to the start point. And the neat thing about KOCOA is that different terrain features can impart certain behaviors to armies negotiating them. And the categories in KOCOA give archaeologists a standardized way of labeling and interpreting the behavior associated with certain terrain features. For example, the 4 different types of obstacles represented here. Disrupting are obstacles that break up enemy formations and tempo, throw off their timetable, cause them to attack in piecemeal fashion, or cause the enemy to commit assets prematurely. Turning are obstacles that cause an attacker to deviate from their current avenue of approach to one of the defender's choosing. Usually these types of obstacles redirect a march into an ambush or a prepared engagement zone. Fixing are obstacles that prevent or delay an enemy from moving any part of their force from a particular location for a particular time. They are fixed or otherwise pinned in place. Blocking obstacles are obstacles that deny enemy access to an area or prevent advance along a particular avenue of approach. Now, battlefields are a different type of site from traditional archaeology. They usually only involve a few contexts and spread horizontally, sometimes over several square kilometers. And this is the case at Monte Bernorio. We have a battlefield with 3 distinct locales that are linked by their artifact assemblages. The Roman camp at El Castillejo, which is marked number 1 in white on this map. The second one is the battle on the plain of Bernorio, which is the hatched number 5 in the center. And the third is the Cantabrian oppidum of Monte Bernorio itself, the green and blue with the 2 and 3 over there on the left. Hold on, there we go. We begin at the Roman camp at El Castillejo, which occupies a key terrain feature comprised of a large, flat, easily defendable plateau, 1,050 meters in elevation above mean sea level. It has nearly vertical 70-meter high cliffs all around. Excavations by Eduardo Peralta Labrador between 2000 and 2002 revealed the architectural remains of a large, irregular shaped fortified camp enclosing an area of 41 hectares. And you can see that on the bottom of the graphic. The outer fortifications were constructed as blocking obstacles to reinforce the natural defense of the cliffs. The conformity to the cliff edge gives the camp its irregular outline. These defenses are comprised of a vallum or palisade set into an auger of upcast earth and stone. Some areas were further reinforced with a fossa duplex, and that is actually part of another auger that entered into the camp. An auger is a ramp. In this case, this was the entrance to the camp on this side here, and this is where they double ditched the flank of the ramp. Some areas were further reinforced with fossil W. Near the center was a seasonal camp of traditional rectangular plan enclosing 18 hectares. It's actually sub-rectangular. And this is the center of the camp. Estimates of the size of the army associated with this camp run from 12,000 to 18,000 men. There were likely 3 legions with auxiliaries present. Unfortunately, the small finds are not described in detail in published excavation reports. They are only listed. This seems to be a little quirk of working in Spain with published archaeology reports that focus on the architecture, and the small finds get short shrift. However, the artifacts are reported to date to the early Principate, and they're pieces of military kit: caligae or sandal nails, triple-bladed arrowheads, peeler fragments, tent poles, and 2 coins dated 82 to 72 BC and 44 to 37 BC. These finds are consistent with those found at Monte Bernorio and the plain in between. El Castillejo was also an excellent observation point with direct line of sight to the southern or southeastern face of Monte Bernorio. From this point, Roman commanders, including Augustus, if he was indeed present, could see the relatively open, unrestricted avenue of approach for mounted and dismounted troops to the oppidum across the plain of Monte Bernorio. They could see the outer earthworks with the freshwater springs nestled within. Now, there is no source of fresh water on the summit of Monte Bernorio. All water used by the inhabitants of the oppidum came from these springs. The springs can be classified as decisive terrain feature. Decisive terrain is a little used classification denoting a terrain feature, the possession of which is so critical to the outcome of an operation that the success or failure of the operation depends on who occupies or controls that terrain feature. If the Romans occupied the springs, cutting the Cantabrians off from their water source, the oppidum would have become untenable in a matter of days. Ultimately, however, the Romans chose to storm the oppidum. They could see the rampart and south wall. They could see a Cantabrian army on the plain, and they planned accordingly. It's kind of interesting to me that this picture was literally taken from the same spot that Augustus would have been viewing the oppidum from. It's kind of neat to walk in his footsteps. Right. This slide is the reverse observation from the previous slide. It is looking east from the south rampart of Monte Bernorio toward El Castillejo. Just as the Romans could clearly observe Monte Bernorio, the Cantabrians could observe the Romans and plan their defense. They likely chose to meet the Romans in the open on the plain. And there may have been several reasons that the Cantabrians chose this course of action. First, they may have wanted to keep the Romans away from their oppidum, knowing what the Romans did to capture peoples in oppida. And this had been displayed very graphically. There are 2 or 3 oppida to the south of Monte Bernorio that were the first to encounter the Roman army marching up the river valley. All 3 of them were taken and destroyed. Second, their cultural makeup, which is inferred from ethnographic sources or mentions in the classical texts, suggests that the Cantabrians preferred small unit tactics, but were able to muster large armies and weren't proficient with them. They were the elite cavalry of the Hellenistic world. The Romans themselves hired them as mercenaries, and there was a long tradition of the Romans and the Cantabrians working together, going all the way back to the Punic Wars. The Romans liked them so much that they actually adopted at least 2 of their cavalry tactics as their own. Now, the plain of Monte Bernorio is well suited, or was well suited, to cavalry operations. And the cavalry would have been useless when fighting from behind a rampart. And third, the population of Monte Bernorio is unknown, but it is estimated at a few thousand, with 1/3 of the number being warriors. So if you take a conservative estimate of 3,000 for the entire oppidum, you're looking at a warrior strength of only 1,000. So it is likely that the army that confronted the Romans on the plain drew from surrounding oppida and perhaps refugees from the previously captured oppida. A metal detector survey in 2007 did recover artifacts, both Cantabrian and Roman, that were consistent with a battle being fought on the plain. Unfortunately, there's heavy looter activity here at the site, and that has prompted local officials to block further access to the site. And this portion of the site is not currently published. And I don't know when that's going to change. But for now, we know that a battle did take place and that the Romans were victorious, with the Cantabrian survivors likely fleeing north away from the oppidum. This slide depicts the Roman avenue of approach from the battle site out on Monte Bernorio plain. This is the approach to the south gate. Once the battle on the plain was concluded, the Romans marched on the oppidum along this line. Cereal agriculture in this area has flattened the intervening earthworks, but aside from that, this landscape looks pretty much as it did back in the Iron Age. If you look carefully, you can still see some of the earthworks here. This is a plan view map of Monte Bernorio's defenses. It shows the discontinuous multi-valent nature of the earthworks. It shows the ramparts with its 3 gates marked 1, 2, and 3, and the freshwater springs marked as blue triangles. The black circle shows the only entrance to the outer earthworks facing the battle site on the plain. And at present, there is no evidence of a retreat through or a defense of the outer earthworks. The number of defenders that remained inside the oppidum is unknown, but it could not have been that many. Certainly not enough to make a concerted stand with something like this. This is a LiDAR image of the same. The outer earthworks here can be seen as lines and ripples in the landscape. And this is a vertical or profile reconstruction of Monte Bernorio's defenses. It shows the nature of the outer earthworks here at the bottom, progressing up the slope to the rampart here at the top. During a walkover in 2016, it was seen that in spite of the farming on the portion of the southern plain that we saw earlier, many of the earthworks are in a good state of preservation. This image is the terminal end of one of them. The earthworks can be classified primarily as a turning obstacle. They were likely meant to confuse and redirect enemy away from the gates, and they probably were not directly defended because the manpower needed would have been more than what the oppidum could provide. There are multiple entrances into the earthworks, and it would have been easy to outflank and trap the defenders. These types of earthworks would have been effective against the slash and grab mounted warband raids that likely took place during the Iron Age, but the Roman army probably would not found these to be much of a deterrent. In 2007, a trench was excavated through one of the earthworks. The trench revealed that the earthworks were constructed on a base of compacted stone, gravel, and earth situated on the outer edge of the slope that acted as a containment for upcast earth and fill. The interior or upslope edge was bounded by a series of stones set into a bed of yellowish clay. This gave the earthworks a cross-section with a steep outer face, a rounded top, and a gradual slope to the exterior that is still visible here in 2016. The earthworks may have been topped with a palisade or survey stakes, which think like an abatis, but there was no evidence found during the excavation. There was likely a ditch on the exterior or downslope side that would have provided the upcast to build the earthwork, but the 2000 excavation trench was not extended far enough to determine if this was so. A 2016 trench cut through a section of the necropolis did uncover a small ditch that was not associated with an earthwork. However, it shows that ditches were present in the area. And again, there was no evidence that the earthworks were defended or that a large-scale retreat passed through them. The 2016 ditch was located below the south gate and was large enough to have uncovered at least one artifact. None were. Believe me, I spent 3 days in the trench and didn't find a thing. The Romans seem to have easily just taken possession of the outer earthworks. The 28-hectare summit was enclosed by a 1,700-meter-long wall and fill rampart. It served as the primary defense for the oppidum. The rampart was constructed of irregular, medium-sized ashlar blocks of limestone quarried directly from the mountain itself. The outer face was set directly on the bedrock at the edge of the slope, with the blocks dressed to present a flat, homogeneous appearance. The interface was built on a foundation of large stone blocks set on another level of bedrock back from the edge of the slope so that it stood higher on the terrace. The intervening space between the wall faces was filled with an aggregation of compacted rubble, earth, and refuse. And all around the wall, the rampart averaged about 3 meters in thickness. This reconstruction, we can see that the rampart is estimated to have stood approximately 6 meters in height and may have been topped by a wooden palisade, barrier, or a roof platform similar to what is shown here. The rampart contained 3 gates, northwest, north, and south, and it would have acted as a blocking obstacle that reinforced the natural cliff and slope while controlling access to the acropolis of the oppidum. You could make the argument that it also functioned as a turning obstacle because it directed access to those gates. Most of the evidence for the Roman assault on Monte Bernorio has been recovered from the area of the south gate. However, it must be acknowledged that the south gate has received the most attention from modern archaeologists, and the results may be skewed because of this. The gate was accessed by a long ramp that descended from the gate to the southern terrace. The ramp was constructed on a foundation of dressed limestone blocks and provided a gentle slope for people traveling to and from the agricultural plateau and freshwater springs. The gate itself is estimated to have been 2 to 3 meters wide and may have been topped with a covered walkway or bridge linking the rampart on either side. Now, the Cantabrians did not use archery, and they only possessed short javelins or rounded river cauls to use as missile weapons. Although they were familiar with archery, they did not adopt it themselves. The range of both of the weapons they used depended on the arm strength of the individual wielding them, but it is estimated that they could be thrown effectively out to about 30 meters. This means that the Romans could get in very close before making an assault. They likely marched on all of the gates, including the south gate, using a testudo type formation. During the excavations of the south gate, a number of Roman projectiles were recovered embedded in the rampart or at the base of the rampart. No Cantabrian javelin points or river cobbles were reported. This would seem to suggest that the gates were the focus of the attack and that the Romans engaged in a suppressing fire from their archers and artillery on the rampart in support of the attack. The projectiles illustrated here, with the exceptions of number 9, 20, and 21, were recovered from the excavation of the south rampart. More work needs to be done with the artifacts recovered. However, we can say that arrowheads number 1 through 12 are pyramidal in cross-section, which is a characteristic of the Syrian type. Number 13 is similar in form to the trilobate tanged points described by Colston as being Scythian in origin. Now, whether this speaks to the origin of the archers themselves or simply a preference for these types of arrows is not known at the moment. These arrowheads are consistent with those recovered from the battle site on the plain and the Roman camp at El Castellano. and they are also consistent with projectiles recovered from other oppida attacked by Romans, such as La Loma, a short distance to the west. Hundreds of these were recovered. Numbers 14 through 18 are fragments of Pita catapultari that likely came from Scorpio. I personally recovered another shaft of one of these weapons from just behind the rampart in 2016. Number 19 through 21 are stones 4 centimeters to 5 centimeters in diameter that may have been fired by a churro ballista or an early form of a manual ballista. Think crossbow. This image is the distribution of the Roman projectiles as recovered from the excavation along the south rampart. As you can see, at least 4 of these things, maybe even 5, are still embedded within the wall. The majority of the remainder display damage from impacting the wall. From this, we can infer a couple of things. The first being that since Roman bows had a range estimated at 230 meters, but a shorter effective range of 90 meters, that these projectiles had to reach the rampart with enough power remaining to actually embed within the wall and damage the tips. The archers were likely well within the effective range, which means they were on the first terrace. Second, it also appears that these were 90-degree straight trajectory shots, otherwise they would have deflected. Taken together, the Roman army was rather close to the wall, likely the very first terrace, which is 30 meters at most from the base of the wall when they launched their assault, and this fire was used to cover the approach to the gate. And you can infer that the lack of return fire from the Cantabrians means that they were not using scaling ladders. Okay, this graphic represents the distribution of Roman projectile points recovered from the entire oppidum. Particularly the top graphic is what I'm referring to. This indicates that the south rampart and gate were not the only locales being attacked by Romans. Although more testing needs to be done on the north and northwest gates, the ballista ball number 21, this one here, was recovered at the base of the exterior wall on the north gate, suggesting that it too was attacked. It would seem likely that all 3 gates came under assault. It is even possible that the Romans approached along the entire length of the rampart while concentrating on the gates. This would have stretched the remaining defenders out, diluting their strength. But it appears that the southern gate was breached, or was the first to be breached. Arrowhead number 9 and ballista ball number 20, found here, were likely fired from the direction of the south gate toward the core of the summit. The south gate is here. Come on, it was here. And if the breach occurred here, the fighting would have moved back this way. Due to the intervening terrains around the north and northwest gates, there's actually a steep lip. It is not believed that 9 and 20 could have been overshoots, that they may in fact represent the last of the fighting within the oppidum. Now, at some point, either during the fighting or after the fighting concluded, a large fire consumed the oppidum. The ash layer encountered while excavating is a very poignant remarker, the end of the Cantabrian occupation of Monte Bernorio. And following the battle, the Romans erected their own fort, which is this red line here. We return to the battle map of Monte Bernorio. There have been a lot of details that have emerged during the examination of the architectural and artifact remains through the lens of KOCOA. I hope this has been an adequate summation. We know that the 3 sites are linked in one event, and we have reconstructed that event based on present evidence. Beginning with the Roman seizure of the key terrain in El Castellejo, where they could observe the objective of Monte Bernorio. They could see the outlay of the oppidum and the presence of the Cantabrian army on the plain. They made their approach over unrestricted open plateau before encountering and defeating the Cantabrian army outside the oppidum. Following the battle, the Romans took possession of the oppidum, of the outer earthworks of Monte Bernorio. If not a complete encirclement, they masked the gates. The ground here did not favor siege works as at Masada or Alessia. There is a very steep drop on the west that is nearly vertical, and it's measured in the thousands of feet. At any rate, full siege works was not needed. Once in possession of the outer earthworks, the Romans stormed the oppidum. The rampart was likely breached at the south gate first, and the fighting progressed from the south gate toward the summit, where the final resistance was overwhelmed. And then the Romans built their own fort on top and controlled the area for decades after. We do have some time for some questions if you would like, but that's what I have for you tonight. And I do appreciate you listening.
Yeah, so if people have questions, you can put it into the chat function and I will relay them. Hold on, sorry, just trying to, my room is now very dark.
Yeah, this is not an optimal setup here.
So I have a question to sort of
Sure,
start
shoot.
out. What really kind of got you into this site? Like,
What got me into this fight?
yeah,
That it is undocumented. This method that we use, KOCOA, it's very common in the United States. The American Battlefield Protection Program has mandated it. And what they did is they made a very subtle change to the methodology when they brought it into conflict archaeology in the US. They changed where you get your defining features from. And what defining features are simply a list of all the terrain features that could be important within your project area. ABPP took their defining features not from maps of the terrain itself, but from the historical record. And I thought this was problematic because basically, you know, if you've got a soldier who's writing a letter home or he's writing something down in a journal, they do that where they stop. They may not even be from the area, so they don't know what landforms, what place names are where, and they tend to see what's right around them. So the ABPP methodology creates something of a circular logic where the historical record defines the KOCOA, where the KOCOA is also informed by the historical record. So when I went to do my PhD thesis, I went back to using the method as the US Army used it. And we tried to really test it in a lot of different ways. And with Monte Bernorio, you have a classical battle. A lot is known about how the Romans fought, a lesser degree with the Cantabrians from ethnographic sources. So that was a help. But Monte Bernorio itself, even if it is Brigida, it's not described in the classical texts. So here you have a major battle that covered 10 square kilometers that is undocumented. And we wanted to see how KOCOA could be used to interpret that, to see how the battle was conducted, how events laid out chronologically. So that was what attracted me to Monte Bernorio. And it was a University of Edinburgh field school where I didn't have to pay to attend. So yes.
Free things always work really well at getting us to do stuff, right?
Feed us.
Yes. One question I just got was, what was the, again, most surprising thing that you didn't expect to find, or, you know, something like that, I think is what they mean.
From this particular battle?
Yeah, but honestly, you know what? Also, in general, in life, what has been the most
unexpected, no, we don't have time for that.
Find you've ever had? So we're gonna make it do a two-part now, because now I want to know the other answer.
All right. Well, let's start with this one, Monte Bernorio. There are a lot of things I think we still have yet to learn about Monte Bernorio because there is still so much excavation that has not been done yet. The battle site on the plain is an unfortunate story, and I don't know how much I can talk about it because there is some political fallout there because of the looting. Most of the artifacts are actually in the hands of private collectors. So the local mayor, I guess is what they call him, just like we do, has closed the site down. So IMBEAC, IMBEAC, which is the group that is excavating Monte Bernardio at the moment and conducted the 2007 survey, can't go back to follow up on what they found. And they have held off on publishing findings from that survey because the site is so heavily looted. But that the battle was fought on the plain is surprising in and of itself. But I think the thing that really surprises me about Monte Bernorio is that the excavation on the southern rampart is a relatively small excavation along the rampart. It's more across the rampart than it is along it. And they still found all of this good evidence of Roman projectiles, but they didn't find any Cantabrian return fire, which tells me a couple of things: that there were very few defenders left to begin with, and that the Romans were not attacking the rampart directly, they were heading toward the gates. Because if there were scaling ladders being used, there would have been something at the base of the wall. So I was surprised to see that the Romans apparently, this was something that was happening very quickly. This wasn't like you see in the movies or Alessia or Masada, where they took the time to build the elaborate siege works around it. This was something where they disposed of the army on the plain, they marched right to the oppidum, and they just rolled over the place. So the whole thing was not expected. It was more of a siege that I was looking for, not this kind of a battle. Second part, what was the second part?
What's been the most exciting thing that you've ever found just in general?
In general, I can't tell you.
Okay.
I actually cannot tell you.
Was it aliens? No, I'm just kidding.
No, hell no. I can't tell you. Okay. I'm really excited about it. It is a paper that I have co-authored with 5 other experts here on a very well-known site here in Scotland that has been one of controversy for years. And the prevailing interpretation of it today does not wash with what we saw, like, at all. So it's another Roman indigenous hill fort fight. But you just have to wait.
Okay, bated breath.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question. Where were the Roman soldiers actually Roman, or were many from conquered territories? Can you even tell?
Very good question. I'm assuming that some were from conquered territories, that there was a mix. This is right after the Civil War with Mark Antony. This is where the Roman army undergoes the first of many transformations. And it goes from basically a militia-based type of situation to now a professional army. So these were units that Augustus had used during the Civil War, and he probably brought back. There is a list of them somewhere, but I'm not sure how accurate the list is. Yeah, I'm not even going to quote it because I'm not sure it's 100% accurate. I'm going to have to do a little bit of digging on that, but there were the 8 legions altogether, and we can probably assign 2 of them, at least 2 of them, to this oppidum because they were there afterwards. We know they were there afterwards, and one of them was from Macedonia.
Okay.
And I can't remember where the other one may have been from Gaul, but the one was definitely from Macedonia. So yes, they were a mix. They weren't just Italian.
Okay. We have another question from David. Was Monte Bernardio, I can never pronounce these names, I'm sorry, even though you've just said it all night. Was it the strategic Cantabrian site, or one of several, or one of many of their strongholds along the coast?
This one's not along the coast, actually. This one is in the interior. Let me flip back to them. It's not a good map. There are better ones out there. It is the way hill forts tend to work, Scotland and the Iberian Peninsula as well, is you will have these larger ones tend to be like a regional capital, and then there are subsidiary hill forts sprinkled around. Now, there are a lot of hill forts in the area of Monte Bernorio. There are 3 on this spit here. There are another 2 over here, and there's at least 1 here and 1 in this area. Now, the exact relationship they have to Monte Bernorio isn't known. It can only be postulated, but based on the size of Monte Bernorio, these might have been subordinate. So think overarching king and then sub-kings, or principal chief and sub-chiefs. Now, whether Monte Bernorio was the capital of all of it, I'm not sure, because most of the work on these things has been around Monte Bernorio. There may be some that are closer to the coast that may be the capital. Like they talk about Mons Vindius. We don't really know where Mons Vindius is. You'll see maps that put it over here to the west, but there's some evidence that that is not accurate, and the river that gives it its name is not accurately placed, that it may actually be here. And that would have been a central point that they all fled to, as these pincer movements closed in around the homeland. The main strategic importance of Monte Bernorio, because sits right at the intersection of 2 major transportation routes. The Meseta is the central plateau of Spain. It's where a lot of the cereal agriculture is done. So you have kind of that nipping at Monte Bernorio. But the river valley there goes north to south, and it empties out near Santander, and it's a straight shot, and it's a nice, wide, easy trip through the mountains. The Cantabrian Mountains are here, and there are foothill mountains to the Pyrenees. Now, the east and west route runs from the Mediterranean Sea and the Pyrenees through the Ebro River Valley. And this is actually a big reservoir they've built on the Ebro. So this is part of the Ebro here. And that runs all the way to the west, pretty much all the way to Portugal. So these are major transportation routes. So if you're going east-west, you're passing by Monte Bernorio. If you're heading north and south, or vice versa, you're passing by Monte Bernorio. A roadway was laid out in antiquity, and we tend to think of these kinds of things as one-offs where the people didn't mix. But this is a frontier zone. People are moving back and forth here. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. The Romans were well familiar with this area, and the Cantabrians were well familiar with the Romans. Cantabrians hired themselves out as mercenaries. So there was travel back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all along these routes. Certainly from the Iron Age up into the Punic Wars. Caesar fought a war against Pompey, battled against Pompey, not far from here in the Ebro River Valley. So there was a lot of travel. It was a major transportation hub. But if it was the capital of all of Cantabria, I can't say, but I can say it was a capital of Cantabria.
Okay. And that leads us into, there's another question, but also sort of a second part of the previous question. Was the Cantabrian leadership a factor in the loss, or was it simply overwhelming Roman forces? But also, how established were the Romans in this area?
The Romans were pretty established. Segasama is not that far Sassamon. I tend to refer to things by their ancient names. I do it in New Hampshire all the time. It drives people crazy. I write 1694 on my checks. But Segasama is not too far south of Monte Bernorio. And that would have been the upper lip of Hispania Superior. And the Romans had passed through here countless times. They had a settlement at the other end of the Ebro River Valley where it empties into the ocean. So they weren't right in Cantabria, but they were on the edges and they traveled through it. So the interaction between the two was sustained and ongoing, literally for hundreds of years. And what was the second part?
Just if the leadership.
Leadership. We don't really know. Part of the problem is we can't get an accurate number on how many Cantabrians were there. There is no good formula for estimating populations of hill forts. There are some that come out of Israel that are based on square footages of dwellings and how much physical space a person needs, basically, to lay down and sleep. And when you apply those numbers to Monte Bernorio, you only come up with a few thousand, 3,000, 4,000. And out of that, you have to estimate the number of actual fighting men. Well, everybody's going to fight when they're put up against a wall. But generally speaking, a third of a population is what you would consider its military strength, which would give Monte Bernorio somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 warriors. Now, when you contrast that number with what the Romans are believed to have had at El Castelleo, 12,000 to 18,000, if Monte Bernorio was not supplemented by some of these other hill forts, that's quite a disparity in number. You're talking 12 or 18 to 1. So leadership there in that kind of a situation, I don't think is going to do anything more really than buy you time. But they decided to meet out on the plain, and that tells me that they felt like they could win. So that they probably must have drawn in a similar number of troops from the surrounding areas. But until we can get into that battle site and really excavate it, not just sample, we don't really know. Don't really know.
Okay. Well, thank you. Those were the questions that we had, and everything. And I thank you for, again, I know it is incredibly late over in your area.
It's early now.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the first time I've done a completely remote presentation. I'm not sure how it turned out because this is not an optimal setup. The lighting in here is bad, and I'm not sure the microphone is.
No, you're working. We can hear you and we can see you, so it was good. So again, everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. Vic, do you have anything else? Any other announcements before we sign off, everyone? And everything. Oh, and David says he thought your presentation was terrific, so thank you.
I'm good. People are free to email me too. I'm very easy to find. All you have to do is really Google me.
And Naomi also says thank you for an interesting talk. Though I know this wasn't from where, the site is in Spain, but Naomi is Scottish, so I'm sure,
Oh, hi, Naomi. Yes, Naomi is going to recognize what site I was talking about when the publication comes out. She'll know what it is. Okay,
then we are awaiting all of them. So thank you, everyone. I will end the meeting and everyone can now get on with their night or their very early morning if you are Craig. So we will see everyone next month. Bye.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.